Hi, I'm Joshua Crudup. Welcome to the Joshua Crudup Show, and this is a special Joshua Crudup Show. And I'm like to read this for the book. I had a book called The Greatest Muhammad Ali. The Greatest Muhammad Ali. And I want to read that book for you. I want to read my book, and it's going to be the story in this one. So, this is going to be a part one of my favorite book, The Greatest Muhammad Ali by Walter D. Mouse. So here I want to read the story, and this is all this is going to be all about. Okay, here we go. It comes from Cassius Clay. That will be a good one. That will be a good one. Okay, here goes. He was that look everything like me well. Now, hard to come by when I was a kid growing up in Harlem. I remember Sugar Ray Robinson, then the welterweight champion, stopping his flashing Cadillac on our block and spilling with me and the other kids. All the kids on the block loved his playing with us, even the girls. Once in a while, we'll spot heavyweight champion Joe Louis on 125th Street near the Apollo Theater in New York City, and that was always a thrill. But Robinson and Lewis were relentlessly simple men. Their balance limited to their exploits in the ring. Another Robinson, Jackie, had just entered Major League Baseball and became, for me, the most exciting male figure in an African American community until the Summer Olympics of 1960. That summer, a lone man was standing on the podium, a gold medal around his neck, while the star, spanning the bell and played. A captain on the television screen I watched announcing that Cassius Clay had won the gold medal in boxing. It was the first Gatsby for most Americans, a man who would become to be known as the greatest. In a sample of the life of Muhammad Ali, there were many relevant points for which to study this remarkable man: race, politics, religion, and the fight game itself are the winners in which Ali's mark was indelibly mine, and I believe in the nation consensus as well. Ali's private life, his dream failing marriage, his relationship with children, especially his own, has often been placed under popular security in his private life. Ali is receiving to be a male human thoughts and human witness. I appreciate the no more Muhammad Ali, but I choose to write about the greatest. And it was as the greatest that Ali has had the greatest impact of our culture and on the spot of professional boxing. And humbling men would have pleased the sports roles no more. And men who would not multi-wish would may have made many Americans more comfortable. As a long black, at times I was ashamed of my color. I was ashamed of my hair. The baseball great Reggie Jackson once said, and Ali made me proud. At a time when the civil rights movement was noted for its turn the other cheek, nonviolent sense, long black men saw in LA the possibility of reclaiming their manhood for long Americans with growing doubts about the Vietnam War in Vietnam. He expressed in the misgivings, but Ali was a father, the heavyweight champion in a sport would destroy his heroes. Joe Louis was severely brain damaged when he died in 1981. Ray Robinson, My Ray Robinson, who had played with us with the streets, suffered from the Alzheimer's disease when he died in 1989. Jerry Quillen, who fought against Ali, is said to have died in a punch-drunk fog in 1999. When I contacted Flo Harrison's office, the governor of Maryland for this book, along that he, too, suffered from brain damage. I spoke briefly with Joe Freezer at a party in Philadelphia and wondered about his journey slowly speech. This was the game that Ali mastered and to which he gave me so much of himself. Today, Muhammad Ali suffers from Parkinson disease, was Boston. The scene has of his most many fantasy, okay, trumpets. Also, the genesis of his tough challenges. While, while no one could be sure, a wonder and a worry for Ali and for all the linemen still to enter the fight business is the cultures of sports. In writing this book, I had decided to look at the public Muhammad Ali, the man who represents so many heroes, who portray the needs of the so many Americans, but most of all, the Muhammad Ali who most touched me. I look upon him as an American, as a follower, as a scapegoat of justice, as someone willing to stand up against the odds, no matter how dominant those odds, no matter how big fish foe. In writing this book, I realized that over the years, I had a million eyes, and yes, even like Muhammad Ali, I still do. So, now this is going to be the book that you will never forget, and I'm going through this now. This is going to be part one of Coolest Clay. And it all begins. Now, the heavyweight black headline at the Louisville Corner Journal will fire with war news. Pearl Harbor has been attacked the month before, and the United States, which had been at peace since 1919, now finds itself at war with both Japan and Germany. Lawmen across the country will voluntarily to join the army, and the lawmen of Louisville, Kentucky, with no exception. Louisville, for most Americans, was known for the Kentucky Derby, the annual horse race that Churchill Downs. The stadium in which the Derby was won was a day of celebration and parties. The race itself was always preceded by the signing of the state song, My Own Kentucky Home. On Saturday evening, January the 17th, 1942, Cassius Clay, mine was not on the wall of the Derby. His wife, a scissors, affectionately called Board, had just given birth to a baby boy in Louisville City Hospital. Cassius decided to give the boy his own name. He would be called Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. The name Clay was a famous one in Kentucky. Even Clay had twice won for president and has served in Congress for over 25 years. Over 25 years. Cassius Marcellus Clay, although the son of the slaveholder, had been part of the international movement. He persisted in a unreligious newspaper, the Examiner in Louisville. He was also one of the founders of the Republican Party in 1854. Cassius Clay, Sr., named after the bandleader, worked as a sign printer in Louisville. He prided himself on his work and helped painting millers in many of the local black churches. His wife, a sinner, had been doing mostly domestic work since her 10 years as an attendant at local Baptist church. The Clays live on Grand Avenue, a quiet street in the west end of the city. When not in the professional classes, the Clays were doing a modular well when the new baby arrived. But how well a black family could do was limited by such Jesuits. Under segregation, black people were not allowed to eat in white-only restaurants, or attend the same schools, or even sit with whites on public transporters or in movie theaters. This separation of people by race was legal and was enforced by the law. This did not mean that whites and blacks did not get along. People, white and black, understood the rules of segregation, and both races knew what they were working on and what they were not. Cassius Clay Sr. understood that he might never have a real relationship with a white person. He might work for a white man or have a conversation with one, but the relationship will stop at the end of the day, or at the end of the night, or at wherever breaking up point, maintaining the status quo between whites and blacks. It was under this system of Dawson's one's place that Cassius Jr. and his younger brother Randolph would grow up. It would influence both of them greatly. Cassius was a shy child. His early school days were not popular even for. He was not, like some fathers, a childhood bully, but a good kid with a sensitivity to injustice. In 1954, 21-year-old 12-year-old Cassius wore his red and white stretches bicycle to the Colonial Auditorium in Louisville. He and a friend visiting the Louisville Home Show, which was a prominent to the black trade show. There was free candy and popcorn, and the junior ale executive as local merchants displayed their goods. When it was time to go, Cassius found that his bicycle was missing. The Swivelers company made the most popular bicycles in the company, and Clay was angry and hurt that his had been stolen. The chance of his friends scrapping together the money for the new bicycle was slight, and Cassius was so upset that he was crying. He wanted to report the bicycle stolen and was told that there was a policeman in the basement. Cassius found the officer, John Morton, and told him what had happened. He also added that when he found whoever had stolen his bike, he was going to beat him up. George Martin had been a member of the Louisville Police full force for years. He enjoyed walking with young people, black and white, and taught boxing at the Clubber's gym. You're thinking about beating somebody up, you have better learn to fight. He told the 89-pound Cassius that suited the boy. He wanted to teach the bike trip depth a lesson. And in his 12-year-old mind, he could imagine himself beating up the protector boy. Cassius started boxing lessons. Many he spent their lives teaching the boys of a special breed. There is often a tenderness about them that is never impressive, but that the child can understand. Joe Martin was such a man. At first, he didn't think much of the new boy's skills. Kansas was skinny and awkward. A lot of the other boys beat him in the ring. Some beat him easy, but there was one thing that was different. Kansas would show up at the gym like clockwork. None of the other boys were as dedicated. Whatever work Morton asked of him, he did. And then some. Soon, he was training 6 days a week with Morton and also with a black man named Fred Stoner. One of the most difficult things for a natural black man to see is the downward spiral of blonde black boys. Some react by turning away by denying that it is happening. Others just already blame the kids. Still others remembering the street laugh in the loop, reach out and offer a helping hand to the hurls and setting disappointment into the minds that had learned not to trust. Fred Stoner at the Gershel Community Center in Louisville was one of the black men reaching out to young boys in the 50s and 60s. One of the problems for black boys was that there were so few outlets for them. Too many children had nothing to do after school, and trouble weren't in the streets. The Grace Community Center gave them a place to be, to hang out, to be safe. It also gave long Cassie Clay to a place to learn more about boxing. Kansas found out about the Grace Center and was eager to see what he could learn from it. He and his brother, Randolph, began to go to both gyms, the Collaborator Gym with Joe Wharton, where Cassius would train as hard as he could, and then the Grace Center. What Fred sooner learned about Cassius, which Martin already knew, was that the loud mountain kid who liked to brag about what he could will do to an opponent was absolutely dedicated to boxing. He practiced for long hours, performing each move till he was taught, learning how to control himself physicality in the ring. When Joe Martin, the patrolman, was a tough guy and it sent his long fathers to be tough, Fred Stoner was more scholarly in the ways of boxing. He knew that Cassius Clay's dream depended on more than his determination. Wait, even when he saw him training as much as 6 days a week, Cassius spent a lot of time with Stoner and appreciated what the black man was offering him. Stoner liked Cassius and his brother. He guessed that the Clay's boys, who didn't drink or smoke, came from the same economic background as the other boys who hung around the essential. Lone black boys such as Cassius and Brenna, who had working class parents, didn't go to Santa Francis and Bel Aids. They grew up with little exposure to outside culture influences. I suppose Clay was a hungry fellow, Stoner said. He didn't come out of an infernal family. He didn't have it too easy. We're all out of the same bag. What Stoner perhaps suspect, and what the world was led to know, was that boxing will bring longer cases Clay out of the cultural ghetto. Boxing will change his life forever. Joe Martin remembered that nothing seems to discourage his classes. Once, he was knocking unconscious, but returned the next day to train against the boy who had knocked him out. Martin producing a local television show, Tomorrow's Champions, and Lon Cassius began to appear on it. He won some fights and lost others. 2 years later, Cassius' dedication to training and his determination to improve was still there. But he wasn't let anything special. To boost his own confidence, he bragged a lot. He told other fathers that they couldn't beat him, they, that they couldn't hurt him. He wasn't a potential particularly hard puncher, but that didn't stop him from announcing that he was going to knock out anyone he faced. By the time Cassius turned 16, things had changed. He was still thin. He was still a light hero, but the hard reflexes and the combination that all professionals in the field had never seen. He still leads fights. He still lost fights, but even the officials who were against him saw that he was good. Cassius was devoting more and more of his time to boxing, the winner of 2 national AAG Omona Adrenaline titles, 6 Kentucky Golden Gloves, and 2 Golden Gloves championships. His mind was set on a boxing career. He dropped out of high school in March 1958. Since Ohio's 10th grade was not an achievement as the upcoming Olympics. He was being loved by fight fans around the country. By his 18th birthday in 1960, there was no doubt about Cassius Clay's boxing skills. There were still problems with his techniques, too. Instead of moving away from punches the way most fighters did, he would simply lean back, judging the distance and involuntarily the punch would travel as it came towards his chin. It was a fundamental mistake. If, in the heat of battle, he just won, he could have been hit hard, but he was fast enough to get out of harm's way. His reflexes were as sharp as anyone had ever seen. It takes more than boxing skills to be a fighter. It takes the courage to stand up to the opponent, knowing that he wants to use his talent to hurt you as badly as he can. It also takes the ability to deal with 2 aspects of pain: the anticipation that you will be hurt, perhaps badly, and the knowledge that you can stop more pain simply by quietly. Kansas seems to have the skills and the courage, and that's what it will take to qualify for the Olympics, which were to be held that summer in Rome. To get to the Olympics, he had to go through a series of fights, meeting the best ultra fighters from around the country. Only one fighter from each weight group would be sent to represent the United States. The finals of the trials were to be held in California. For Joe Martin, still working with Clay, this goes as a problem. Cassius was afraid of flying. Martin convinced Cassius that there was a time for a long train ride across the country. During the turnabout flight, Martin had to work hard to calm the long man down. It worked. Clay won the trials and qualified to go to Rome. Clay wasn't heavy enough in 1960 to enter the Olympics as a heavyweight. Instead, he was entered in a 178-pound light heavyweight division. He won his first 3 fights fairly easy. Clay had trained hard for the Olympics. Even in the Olympic Village, he stayed up late at night to show chattering box in his room while his boxing teammates slept. His style, straight, quick punches, and involved in being hit, impressed the international judge, but the full fight proved difficult. Olympic matches only had 3 rounds. A fighter is scored by how many times he hit his opponent clearly and by his ability to avoid being hit. The fighter who wins 2 rounds almost always wins the match because it is extremely difficult to knock out an opponent in 3 rounds. The Polish challenger Zambella Pasikadzewski was a European champion and had won the bronze medal 4 years early in the 1956 Olympics. Kazowski won tough and powered into the special Clay. The left-handed polishing fighters, straight and Morton style, made Clay look bad. He quickly lost the first round. Clay tried to sink quick jab and boot trapezes in the second round and realized that he was receiving the most punishment as he was given. He had dreamed in the glory of being a champion, and this was his chance. He didn't want to lose. He made a small change in style, setting his feet more firmly in order to draw harder punches. He had to start the oncoming rush. At the end of the second round, it wasn't clear who was ahead. Clay came out in the third and final round with a determination that was become his trademark, He lose every bit of the skills and never had he had to take control of the fight. The end of the 3 round left Puskas with battle and happiness against the Welsh. The 1960 games in one were a turning point in Olympic coverage of the emergence of two black stars. One was the star sprinter from Tennessee State University, William Winoff, an outstanding athlete. Winoff was a hit with Americans across the country as he won gold medals in the 3 events. The other star was Cassius Clay at the Miller Cinema. 18-year-old Cassius Clay looked like a shot next to the older man he had beaten. The fight had been broadcast on television all over the world. People who knew next to nothing about the sport now knew about a lone man from Louisville named Cassius Clay. The Olympic team flew back home from Warren to New York. When Clay returned to the United States, his world had turned completely around. What was happening to him? The lone man from the Star Celebration shop who was used to being banned for sexual restaurants in parts because he was black was now being celebrated. In New York, he visited Harlem for the first time met Sugar Ray Robinson, considered by many to be the greatest fighter, proud for proud, who had ever entered the ring. Sugar Ray Robinson was handsome and flashing. He liked to drive his latterly colorful Cadillac convertible, slowly through the streets of Harlem, stopping now and again to spend with young boys, shaking hands and general, accepting the utmost appreciation of his fans. Before the Olympics and the gold medal, Clay had grasped the kind of attention a famous boxer could receive. When he returned, he was getting much of the same attention. At 18, the world seen his furthest target. Back home, the group calling itself the Louisville Bachelor Group agreed to back Clay in his professional career. The group consisted of even men, 11 men. There were white and Southerners, but there were also people who were willing to look out for a lone black man from their home state. Clay receiving a $10,000 signing bonus from the group. It was graduating at $333 per month due against his official owners. In traditional, 15% of his income will be put into a preschool plan for him. At the time, for boxing and for professional sports of any kind, this was a great deal for Clay. Most beginning fighters were looking to clear $200 fight at the start of their careers, and none of them got a signing bonus. Very often, very often, they would have to take no other jobs that were interested with their training. Clay thought the help of the Louisville Bachelor Group could come essentially slowly on the boxing. The hard fight. There are two sides of boxing. On the other side are the winners, trying to hold on to the money they make, trying to maintain their health. On the other side are the losers, with both money and health slipping away. Alcohol Moore, the man selected by the Louisville Bachelor Group to be Cassius Clay, new training, knew both sides of the game. Actually, Moore was born in Benoit, Mississippi on December 13, 1913. He was raised by his aunt and uncle in St. Louis, Missouri, and became boxing through reform school. His professional boxing career began in 1936. Life was hard for all Americans during the Depression years that began in 1929, didn't end until World War II. Boxing was a way of making a few dollars during those years, but it was nothing like the lucrative sport it would become. The long more work a number of jobs as a lawyer sometimes taking fights with just a day's notice. Boxing has a number of economic levels. There are the highlights fights, the major box office draws. These are the fights of the which the international sport community take notice and which command a high prices or payments for fights. For the fighters, there are usually a major effort to promoting these events to the general public, and the fighters are often well known. All fighters want to reach this level because of the money to be made. Followers and managers at the top are never eager to fight someone from a lower level. The mind level fights feature alleged no bosses, and there is often a pressure for the regular champions in each weight division to fight the top contenders. At the bottom of the game are the fighters who will scrabble for matches and who fight for $3 while holding down full-time jobs. The goal for the lone fighters is to get a belt with a upper level opponent. Shooting will find himself in the ring with the same fighters over and over again because the top fighters will simply annoy him. But for the achievement and for the most longer fighters, boxing had two very special allures. The first was the hope for the big payday and the match that would popular the man who often scrubbing the floors to call into the big time. The good life of family without clothes, fancy clothes, a pocket full of money, and celebrity. The downside of this dream is that few fellows making money at boxing. A truck of a mile love reports in the 1960s might have been a mess of $2,500. For this is the Boston had to pay his training as purser, consultant, medical expenses, equipment, traveling expenses, and giving perhaps as much as 40 to 50% to his manager. He was lucky if he broke even. If he broke even at the lowest levels, even to this day, fighting is for little more than a few extra dollars of spending money. The second lure option was the same for the fighter as for the fan. The sport itself, the exciting, the exciting, premiering a pair of two men fighting in a ring. Convenient men might control their impulse to hit people, deny the rush that violence can sometimes produce. But in a ring, it was, and still is, allowed. The best fighters are eventually those who can most easily break down the barriers of control we had all been taught. He can bring a race to the ring, a willingness to smash a man into unconscious to see him failing and bleeding on the cabins. To fight on a professional level, you have to wait to want to help people. You have to want to see the happiness looking in a fellow's eyes as you sing your note, let another punch in his decoration. Professional boxing is a sport of blood and pain and more pain. It is a sport in which naked brutality is the norm. If a fellow doesn't love it, he needs to be in a different place. The dark side of this issue is that opposite. But it is the boss's desire to battle his opponent without mercy. It is also his opponent's on to do the same. The cost to the human body is struggling as I can run more obsolete. Your body just has a certain number of hard fights in it. And then morning boxing the fellows are required to wear protect to the headgear. Points are scored by the landing of blows, and not by the force behind the blows or to the fat. A knockdown is not considered more satisfying than any other blow, and knockouts are in professional boxing, the force of the blows, especially to the head, and more highly regarded by the judge than lighter blows. Knockout, knockouts, especially in a heavyweight class, are the name of the game. A knockout, simply put, is an injury to the brain that reduces the suffering incapable of standing up. Sometimes a father can sustain and join to be brain suffering factor to make him unwell of what is going on while still able to stand, and therefore vulnerable to even more punishment. References are consistently looking at fathers' eyes to see if they are out on their feet. Machinima was 47 when Kansas Clay arrived at his camp in November 1960, sent by the Louisville sponsored group for training. But Clay had already tasted the kind of thing he had long before, had seen the lights of Harlem and those were the press cops. He had seen in his mains and sports illustrated and the television and was going to love it. Now he was at the Spartan camp or more. We have been fighting longer than Clay had been alive, and he wanted to teach the longer star to eventually fight. Clay trained in a South Mine, Moors of Plattsburgh, named camp in Guatemala, California. Moore tried to teach Clay his way of avoiding process, but every fighter comes to his own style based upon his own version of himself and the sentiments of his skill. Moore saw himself as a survivor, and indeed he was, having survived in an amazing 24 years in the ring. He stayed low in the ring, losing his arms and shoulders to Abel's punches as he was moving into his opponent. Taking the punches to his arms and body did not put him at risk of being knocked out or sustaining a career-ending injuries. He had seen too many boxers who were pumped drunk, who was punched drunk after even a few years of fighting, and knew what was the combination of blows to the head could do to the man. Clan didn't think that extremely more was born in what he was teaching it, but what the longer fellow understood better than anyone else was the ways of his own skills and how those skills made him feel confident in the ring. Sugar Ray Robinson was considered one of the best fighters who had even lived. He had the uncanny ability to punch with devastating force while moving backwards. His hand speeds and combinations were legendary. He was a team talent, flashing fighter, and Clay was impressing him by the middleweight of popularity. Clay's style, the style he was vulnerable, also had a strong defensive commitment. He had fantastic hand speed and foot speed. His physical combination, his ability to move around the ring, was impressive for a man had him size, flop like a butterfly, sting like a bee, was more than a clever sorter. It was a technical that would take him to the very top of the boxing world. But the sheep more wonder that Clay's famous fabulous speed will one day fade or be slowed by figure in the closing rounds of a long fight. Still, speed was Clay's game and fit his personality. He didn't want to stand toe to toe and slugging out with an opponent. He wanted to frustrate the men he fought to mess with their minds as they swung at him and missed. Clay was also confident that he could figure out the styles of the man he will fight and undermine their straightness. But he understood there would be bigger, stronger fighters than he was. He felt that the combination of his physical skills and his understanding of the fight game will defeat any opponent. When Cassius Clay went home from Moore's camp for the Christmas holiday, he knew he would never return. The greatest. As impressive as the Lon Clay's Olympic experiences was, there were two events that had occurred years before, in May 1954, that perhaps had the most influences on him. In Southern Asia, the fall of their pound-bound power. In Vietnam, signaling the French defeat and the beginning of the America's involvement in a long and bitter war. The United States at first sent soldiers to Easters as invasion to the southern Vietnamese army. As the war escalates, however, it became clear that Americans will also have to serve as combat soldiers. Many people felt that the United States should not have been involved in that war, and did not want to support it either physically or by entering the named forces. At home, the issues of the race loomed large. The Supreme Court's ruling to end school segregation with the Brown versus the Board education decision she had met with new opportunities for African Americans. The truth of the matter, thought, was that certain schools refused to allow African Americans to register, and that new lawsuits were being filed to force integration. The civil rights movement was growing within the United States as the Vietnam War was intensifying in Asia. Both events were a fact Clay dispute. In 1962, Cassius Clay looked longer than his 20 years. His appearances, handsome to the point of being pretty, as he called himself, was a marked contrast to his choosing professionally. The look for Clay struggled with his fans, recording his portrait on television. Looked to all the world like a friendly kid, not a manufacturing photo. His good look and his playfulness had Clay attacking on a lot of the lonely, far different from fighting fathers who pursued him, young people, black and white, especially identifying with the brass long man from Louisville. Miller and his new friends had never fallen in boxing before. The idea of men beating each other senseless was not a sport for anyone, but Clay made it different. The Miller, especially took the Curtis Clay, unlike the usual rather heavyweight fighters, sport poorly to gasoline to English or in Mexico Valley once, playing with his mind a mile a minute. I am the greatest, he would shout at anyone who would listen. The president always appreciated Clay's shouts and ranks. Some sports widows were open in their desires for Clay, who was the bragging for. They couldn't wait until someone shut up the Louisville lip. Like him or hate him. The press was writing about Clay, and he understood the importance of popularity. He was becoming a middle sensation. Widows began to wonder who the real Cassius Clay was. Was he in scared psychoanalytic clown just looking for a big payday in boxing? When Clay claimed that he was the greatest, was he references to the greatest fighter or the greatest human being? Well, by 1962, Clay had not proven himself as a boxer against a major opponent. There were fight professionals who thought he had superior skills. but skills alone did not make anyone the greatest. What would happen when he faced an opponent at the top of the game, with skills were as good as his, and who will provide the duck shot that all fighters every talent face if they spend enough time in the ring? All fighters reach that moment where they get badly hurt. What would Clay do when his moment came? Boxing fans and writers always compare fighters, and Long Clay was no exception. The chief comparison was with the man who had held the heavyweight championship the longest, Joe Louis. Louis' heavyweight career began in 1934, and he won the heavyweight championship in June of 1937. Born Joseph Louis Bowles Louis, the Blonde Bomber, was proud, disciplined champion who never bragged on about his conquests. His managers was advising him never ever to smile after a win, especially against a white opponent. During World War II, Louis enlisted in a army and fought 96 exhibitions in quarter the troops were raising thousands of dollars in U.S. bonds to support the war effort. America saw Louis as a religious simple person who did not champion the traditional position of the black man. Louis' most famous fights were the Max Scapulary, a gentleman heavyweight, on June 19, 1936. The Nazi war machine was geared up for world domination. Most of the Nazi practicality, especially Popeye, dealt with the idea of racist supremacy, and the Nazi leader, Robin Hill, was scrabbling as professor his thing as a master race. Was going about knock out Joe Louis in the 12th round of the fight. The Nazis were eliminated. By 1938, World War II was already raging in Europe, and it seems like the United States will soon be involved. The Nazis were eager to have Scrivener defeat Louis again and become the world champion. The night of the fight, June 22nd, 1938, millions of black Americans were hoping around the raiders, hoping for their joy to defeat the German. They didn't have to wait long. Louis knocked out Scrivener in the first round. All of America was proud and relieved that in America had won. As a fall, Joe Louis was capable of knocking an opponent out with one punch, an ability that Clay had not shown. But it was Joe's deity that people talk about when they compare the two fighters. Will Clay ever display such deity? Another fighter on the same scene in 1962 was Charles Sonny Limited. Leinster was considered by many in boxing insiders as being unbeatable. A massive man with good boxing skills and crushing punch, he was seen as the most formidable heavyweight boxer. Because of Lynch's ties to organizing and crime, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, asked Floyd Patterson, the heavyweight champion at the time, not to fight Lynchton. Patterson, a man dedicated to the sport of boxing, felt that all contenders deserved a chance at the crown. For Cassius Clay, the 1960s had begun with the Olympics, a gold medal, and international fame. By the beginning of 1962, he had already won 10 professional fights against carefully selected opponents. Another Olympic gold medalist, Floyd Patterson, had lost the heavyweight championship to the powerful Swede Ingeborg Johnson and had won it back conventionally with a crushing knockout. Patterson was scheduled to fight Sonny Liston in September 1962, and no one gave the former Olympian much of the chance against the much bigger, harder hitting Liston. The September 25th fight between 214-pound Sonny Liston and 189-pound Floyd Patterson ended quickly, with Liston knocking out Patterson in the first round. 2 months later, Clay fought his former teacher, the Agile Moore. I had to fight him for financial reasons, Moore said. It wasn't what either of us wanted, but I was in a blind fight master. Clay predicted he would knock out the 48-year-old boy in the fourth round and accomplished that feat. Moore was claiming over the hill, but he still had a measure of respect. People were still wondering just how good Clay really was. Professional fights are entertainment events designed to make money. Ticker, television and video rights and even film rights are all for sale. Sonny Liston had endorsed Floyd Patterson for the championship, and a rematch was scheduled for July 1963. But another Liston Patterson fight projected as another early loss for Patterson was not a big money fight. So the question was, who would be a Southern counter appearance to Liston and the commander of the lost money and major heavyweight fight could bring? Cassius Clay decided to promote himself as a boxer. Meanwhile, more and more of the burden of the war in Vietnam fell on American soldiers. The Cold War also became more interesting as Russian missiles were discovered in Cuba, causing the international crisis. Colonel John H. Glenn became the first American astronaut to go into orbit. In the South, freedom riders, civil rights workers attempted to engage in interesting bus lines and train. Tenements were victorious. Tourists, um, Terminals were victorious, beaten by racist. Police dogs were used to attack African Americans protesting attempts to keep them from moving black athletes, for the most part, were not part of the civil rights movement. Joe Louis did not speak out on racism. Sugar Ray Robinson, like Joe Louis, has served in the United States in the Army and hard-fought expeditions in the States and Europe during the World War II. Floyd Patterson made a point of being not color and moved his family to the primarily white neighborhood. He considered himself first and foremost a boxer, and he just wanted to get along with all people. In 1962, however, America was changing. Television was bringing both the civil rights and anti-war movements into the America homes. This was the border in which 20-year-old Cassius Clay came to manhood. Direct involvement in the civil rights movement was not that easy for long African Americans to accomplishments in order to maintain a favorable position with liberty of service. Movement leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., James Freeman, and A. Philip Randolph recovered college graduates and other high education people. The only major organization that was giving a voice to the common man was the Black Museum Group, known as the Nation of Israel. In 1962, Clay drove to Detroit and held the Nation of Israel leader, the Holy Elijah Muhammad, for the first time. He also met a man who would greatly influence his life, a man called Michael X. Kansas was melted into manhood, like all Latin Americans had saw the racial confidences throughout the country. He saw more and more lawmen of his own age questioning the country's involvement in the Vietnam War. Many other Americans did not know what to make of this longer generation. Nor did they know what to make of lone man wanted around saying that he was the greatest. And that's the end of the part one. Part two starts next time. Till then, this is Justin Kerr of the Justin Kerr Show.